The plot thickens. For anyone who missed it, the Angela Rayner saga has just taken a turn for the worse. Well, for Angela, anyway. Here's a catch-up. Shortly after taking her name off the deeds of a property that she still calls her primary residence in Manchester, Angela Rayner then purchases a property in Brighton for just shy of £800,000. Because technically she now no longer owns her main residence in Manchester, she can take advantage of the lower rate of stamp duty on a new home in Brighton, because on paper she only owns one house, yet she still calls her residence in Manchester her main home. Now, she's done absolutely nothing illegal. However, it transpires that our honest, hard-working class lass employed the services of a company which specialises in wealth protection, a posh word, in my view, for tax avoidance. So whilst Angela Rayner and co.'s rhetoric has been to talk tough about the wealthy with a regime that punishes anyone who dares to try and achieve, taxing to death literally farmers, landlords and businesses, suffocating growth, our Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has employed a firm to show her how she can legally protect her wealth. Again, perfectly legal, but some might call that tax avoidance. But let's take a look at this so-called working-class Labour Party front bench representing working people. At the helm, Sir Keir Starmer, son of a toolmaker, although I think his dad owned the company. When Keir's school became fee-paying, in order not to disrupt his education, a bursary was set out so that it could be funded. The very opposite of what his government are doing, installing that on private schools mid-year to maximise revenue from cash-strapped parents, many of whom are now taking their kids out of private education as they can no longer afford the fees. Keir Starmer is a multimillionaire with a statutory instrument for his pension. Many of the cabinet are super wealthy and millionaires too, and they get huge perks for the job. Free clothes from donors, tickets to events that most of us could only ever dream of being able to attend, let alone afford. Remember Sir Keir Starmer's glasses, of all things. They get grace and favour mansions, second home allowances, pretty generous expenses. I did say yesterday that Angela has taken some good advice, not being rude to her, but this nifty legal manoeuvre of splitting the ownership of her £650,000 constituency home with a trust seemed way above her capabilities to engineer. And it turns out it was apparently administered by a blue-chip law firm, Shoesmiths, who at the time boasted that it had a wealth protection team to help its private clients. I'll bet. And now there's even speculation that Angela purchased the Hove property, possibly because support for her in her constituency is dwindling, and that Brighton and Hove might be a better bet. Seriously, what are this Labour government about? Who do they stand for? Themselves, I think, is the answer. They are proving to be the very opposite of what they promised. In my view, Angela Rayner is an exact example of just that. But before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is it time to ditch net zero and drill, baby, drill? Tory leader Kemi Badenoch thinks so and has pledged to get all the oil and gas out of the North Sea. But is this realistic? And who would benefit? Would it be Britain? We'll debate that. Is it time to ditch net zero and drill, baby, drill? Then for the next Great British Debate of this hour, I'm asking, are Labour out of ideas already after seemingly coming after every tax possible? The Prime Minister's new economic advisor, a former Bank of England deputy governor, has repeatedly championed new wealth taxes. We'll ask, are Labour out of ideas? And doctors are hailing a new pill for patients with high blood pressure resistant to existing medication as a game changer and a triumph of science. I'll be speaking to the professor behind the research. That's coming up in the next hour. As ever, send me your thoughts, post your comments, gbnews.com/your say. Right, I'm joined now by Labour councillor Sebastian Salek, who joins me. So, Sebastian, welcome to the programme. We're talking about Angela Rayner, talking about the flipping of properties and stuff. It wasn't illegal at all, but Look, this is a very bad look for the Labour Party, surely.
I don't see where that's coming from, really. It's quite clear what's happened. You explained it relatively clearly yourself a moment ago.
I did.
Rayner seems to have gotten rid of her share of the one property she owns, and therefore, when she buys another one, that is her sole property that she owns. So she's doing really what most of us do if we sell a house and then buy another one. There's really nothing complicated here.
Well, she hasn't really done that, has she? She's put the property in trust for her children, which would be fair enough. However, she's done it just at the point before she then buys another property. And let's not forget, she did take some good legal advice, and these people are very good at helping wealthy people keep their money. So, to me, a lot of people, and if I had done it, that may have looked like tax avoidance. And let's not forget the Grace and Favour property, which we're not sure whether she pays council tax on.
Well, look, if anybody wants to put a property in trust, which, let's be clear, all of us are entitled to do as British citizens, that requires the services of a law firm. Now, you mentioned earlier that Shoesmiths has a wealth protection team, and she used those services. I haven't seen any evidence of that, so I'd be keen to see where your sources are for the fact that she used that specific team. I also noticed that team was sold off to another law firm a couple of years ago, so it's no longer a part of Shoesmiths. But the reality is, if you want to set up a trust, you need to use the services of a law firm.
No. At the time of that transaction, she used them. Now, this is from the Mail on Sunday, so that's where my source is. That's where I've got my source.
So when did she make that transaction?
It was in 2023.
OK, and I'm not seeing anything in the Mail on Sunday that she used the wealth protection team. What I'm seeing is that the law firm also has a wealth protection team.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, if you do your food shop at a supermarket that also sells cigarettes, it would be unfair for me to call you a smoker as a result. OK,
so what do you think she used Shoesmiths for then? I mean, do you think that's not true?
If you set up a trust, you need to use the services of a law firm. That is an option that is open to any of us who would like to do that.
Yeah, but she took advice from them, and it sounds to me like she did that, obviously knowing that she's going to buy another property. And as a housing secretary, that's not a good look, is it? And let's talk about the Grace and Favour property, which some could argue is actually her primary residence. The house in Manchester is still labelled as her primary residence, yet she has got another property in Hove. So which one is it? Which one is Angela's primary residence?
Well, she's saying that her primary residence is the one in Ashton-under-Lyne.
That she's put in trust for her children just before she then buys a property in Brighton.
That's correct, but there's nothing to stop her from living in that home.
Yeah.
The property in London, let's be very clear, she doesn't own that, the government owns that, and it is very normal for a senior politician to have a home like that. It's very normal for the Prime Minister, for example, to have three homes.
That's true,
as well.
That's true, but
you
could argue.
I mean,
you could argue, Sebastian.
They're trying so hard to come up with a story here, but I'm afraid there really isn't one.
I don't think they're trying hard, and I think Angela Rayner, if she's really looking to be the leader of the Labour Party, which it could potentially be the case, especially of the disastrous record of Sir Keir Starmer, she needs to look at the optics of that. And let's talk about the Grace and Favour. Yes, other politicians have had Grace and Favour properties, absolutely, because they work in London. So that property there, some people would say that is actually her primary residence, because she's probably there 4 or 5 nights a week. So that would look to be the primary residence. And I'm wondering whether she pays council tax on that.
So primary residence it's not up to us to
your
decide
main
which
residence.
It is. You designate which one is your primary residence, and she has designated her Manchester home to be her primary residence. We know that she does not pay the council tax on the home in London because that is owned by the government and the government pays council tax. There's nothing new about that. Every politician who has ever lived in that building has not paid council tax on that.
That's not true.
But I think we're seeing
that's not true. That's not true. So there are a couple of them. So Michael Gove got in trouble because people were saying that he should pay his council tax on the Grace and Favour property that he was having. Also, John Prescott got into trouble for that. So that's not true. People did not like the optics of it, and so they insisted that they pay the council tax. I don't like the optics of this. She has 3 potential properties that she can live in. The one that she's calling her main residence, which apparently she's very rarely there. I don't know the truth of that, but she's designated that the main residence just before purchasing another property, thereby saving herself about £40,000 worth of stamp duty.
So I'm afraid, Nana, whether you like the optics of it or not is entirely irrelevant. What I would ask you is, has she done anything wrong? No,
she's not done anything illegal, but ethically it looks pretty bad, because if I'd done that, and especially being the housing minister, where she said there were many houses but there weren't enough houses, I mean, let's not talk about that disastrous Trevor Phillips interview. We played a clip of that yesterday. But the point is, it's the optics. She's the housing minister. She's been talking about wealth and ensuring that people don't hide their wealth. And there she is doing something that looks very much like tax avoidance to me.
Well, again, your only argument seems to be, I don't like the look of this, which is
Well, a lot of people,
but it feeds back into the constant narrative around Angela Rayner. If she parties in Ibiza, she gets criticised. If she vapes on the beach, she gets criticised. She gets cosmetic surgery, she gets criticised. I think this whole debate is laced with a heavy amount.
She's the housing minister. She needs to be
really unpleasant to see.
Well, the Conservatives have launched an investigation into it because it doesn't look good as a housing minister at all. So we'll see the outcome of that, won't we?
So let's be clear, they haven't launched an investigation, they're calling for an investigation because they've got nothing else to do, because I'm really sorry, the Conservatives are thoroughly irrelevant at the moment. They're being completely
may well be
outflanked by
irrelevant.
Reform, and they're trying to whip up a story when James Cleverly, the shadow housing minister, who's been trying to whip up some kind of scandal here, himself has been a former landlord and indeed brought it or voted against legislation that would require landlords to make their homes fit for human habitation. Now that is a concern.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Pure fumes.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm thinking about Jazz Athwell then, one of the biggest property owners in the Commons, 15 properties. He had his own licensing rules that he set up, and then it transpired that he didn't even follow his own licensing for the properties that he owned as a landlord, and that they were infested with all sorts of things, ants and all sorts of things. So if you're talking about landlords, well, that's another Labour politician. There we go.
You're completely right. And if you think that I'm going to condone that, then you've got another thing coming. I'm not going to stand here and defend landlords who don't do their jobs properly, regardless of what colour they wear.
Well, that's good. I'm glad we can agree on something. But as for Angela Rayner, I'm sorry, but back in the real world, the optics look terrible. She's the housing minister. She has 3 potential properties she can live in. The one that she actually declares as her main residence, she suddenly, just before she buys another property, puts it in trust for her kids and then kind of sells off her share in a sense. So it would appear that she doesn't own it. And then she buys another property and avoids the full stamp duty. Now, a lot of people would look at that and say the optics are very, very bad. In particular, she's the housing minister. And, of course, she doesn't pay council tax, if you just confirmed, on a grace and favour property, where many other politicians have been forced to do that.
No, you're making one argument again and again and again that you don't think the optics...
that is the
you're
argument.
Very entitled
Do you
to
want
your
me to make
opinion,
another
but
one?
it doesn't make this more of a story than it already isn't. I'm afraid there is nothing that has been happening here that is wrong. There is nothing here that is illegal. I know it's late August. I know Parliament isn't in recess. I know there aren't many political stories. But digging deeper on this one, from the Mail, from the Telegraph, it just looks desperate, and it really erodes trust in those publications when they come up with a story that is genuinely good, because people are going to see this rubbish and think, well, who are we to trust them?
Well, we shall see, Sebastian Selleck. I think the public will decide on that one.